You know the situation so terribly well with Iran. Can we truly separate out just the nuclear enrichment issue, the nuclear program, from things like Hezbollah, terrorist activity, various funding of activities through the region?
Well, again, there's obviously no question, I think, in anyone's mind that many of Iran's activities in the region are extremely problematical, and we need to address those. But I still maintain that the philosophy that we had in negotiating the JCPOA is a correct one, namely, get the nuclear weapon threat off the table permanently, in fact, have the world's strongest transparency and verification regime, and then work with our allies in the region, work with those with whom we negotiated the deal, the Europeans, Russia, and China, to in fact resolve those other problems.
So we have heard, as I said just 6 days ago from Iran, that they are going to step back from the agreements that they made in 60 days from 6 days ago, if in fact they don't get some relief with respect to Europe. Do we know what steps they would be taking in terms of uranium enrichment, and how threatening is that?
Well, they've made a couple of statements about not respecting the limits on heavy water and not respecting the limits on the accumulation of nuclear material. I want to emphasize this is not nuclear weapons material, but enriched uranium. And what I would say is the JCPOA has always had its major focus on the issue of limiting, curtailing the production of nuclear material. So clearly, that would be a most unwelcome development if they were, in fact, to exceed those limits. Hopefully, in these 60 days or whatever, that a resolution to this can be found so that Iran, in fact, stays within the parameters of the agreement.
If, in fact, they did take the steps that at least they've indicated thus far, would it take a significant step toward actually developing a nuclear weapon, or is this more of a gesture to indicate on the part of Iran how displeased they are?
Well, I would say that especially if we maintain the verification regime, because the IAEA, the international inspectors, have really stepped up the game in terms of looking at what's happening in Iran. And I might add, not just in the facilities Iran has declared, but also in gaining access to other facilities where there might be some suspicion of non-compliant behavior. So far, the inspectors have found Iran to be clean on that. That's very, very important. And in the end, we have to realize that, of course, if Iran were to restart a nuclear weapons program, which we know they had in a structured way until 2003, if they were to restart that, the odds of being caught with these new tools at the disposal of the international inspectors and, of course, national intelligence capabilities would really raise the bar very dramatically and would risk Iran's having the complete brunt of the international community returned to them. In contrast, unfortunately, one of the collateral damages, I think, of the way we are approaching this, withdrawing from the agreement, is that it is very unlikely, no matter what happens, that we will see the kind of cohesive approach between the United States, Europe, Russia, and China that we enjoyed in the negotiations, because there was no doubt that all the countries were rowing together to get Iran's program under strong surveillance and under strong restrictions for 15 years.
And from your understanding of the Iranians, do you think there is any connection potentially between this, at least diminishment of the Iranian Accord, the JCPOA on the one hand, and some of the activities we're seeing over there, for example, in the Strait of Hormuz, with reports about attacks on tankers that seem to be a little vague right now, but there are indications it might ultimately be tracked back to Iran. And then we have drone strikes on some pipelines and some pumping stations in Saudi Arabia. Is it possible that Iran is feeling they are slipping the leash a bit?
Well, I'm not going to speculate as to the origin of these incidents. Certainly not until our community, our intelligence community, is very confident in their rulings. But I think the real issue here is that the risk of an escalation of things just getting out of control is too high. And we have to find a way to hopefully continue the pressure to resolve some of the other regional issues, like the Yemen conflict, for example, but not go to a place where we have no way of managing crises that could get out of control. Certainly, everyone has been talking about not wanting a military confrontation. That is certainly a very good idea. That is to avoid a military confrontation. In my view, we've had too much of that in the region in the last 15 years. But again, we must guard against miscalculation, blunder, stumbling into what becomes a military confrontation.
Okay, the last one's a hard one, I think, at least, Mr. Secretary. You are a nuclear physicist, and you have been involved in nuclear nonproliferation and controlling nuclear weapons. Give me a rank order. The Russian situation and the backing away, apparently, of the United States from really controlling Russian armaments more effectively, North Korea and Iran. Which one is the most dangerous?
Well, I'm not going to do 1, 2, 3, but I will say that, of course, the only one where I would consider there to be an existential threat against the United States is from Russia, simply because of the size of their stockpile and ours, of course. And so that's another case where we are concerned about blundering into an escalatory situation. We feel very strongly that we must renew the kinds of strategic discussions with Russia that we had at the height of the Cold War, that gave us crisis management tools, gave us strategic stability. This is not a favor to anybody. This is a mutual existential interest. And so, frankly, I view the statement made by Secretary of State Pompeo after the meeting with Foreign Minister Lavrov to be an encouraging one, if indeed that leads to a resumption of those kinds of strategic discussions. For example, by the way, in the Cold War, we had very effective and consistent military-to-military discussions to manage crises. Those are dramatically reduced today. That's not good for either country.